and appreciate all the wonderful words. And hopefully my co-presenter, John Gontarz, is here as well. John, you want to give us a quick little intro?
Yeah, sure. Hi, can you hear me?
We can, thanks.
Okay, great. Yeah, hi, I'm John Gontarz. I've been working with SAP-related systems for 20 years. My first introduction was to a BW system in the 2003 timeframe. Since then, I've been working with SAP ever since. I was an SAP employee for 8 years, 4 in services and 4 in pre-sales, before joining Snowflake in June of 2018. So very excited to be here talking to everybody today and presenting the solution we have with Snowflake and HVR for SAP data.
Awesome, thanks, John, and good to meet everybody. My name is Josh Robinson. I've done lots of different jobs in IT, been in information technology for a little over 20 years now. It's hard to admit, but I've done everything from turning the screws in the data center to help architect big data solutions in many different industries. So we're going to give you a quick discussion on SAP data and why it's so important and how you can really gain new insights from it utilizing HVR and Snowflake. So let's jump right in. Quick agenda. We'll try not to slide you guys to death. So we're going to first jump in, and everybody probably knows the importance of SAP data. We're just going to kind of reiterate kind of what is out there in the SAP world. And then we'll talk a little bit about what HVR provides. I imagine a lot of you don't know who HVR is, so I'm really excited to talk to you about us. And then John's going to take us through how Snowflake can really simplify your life. You guys have probably heard of Snowflake before, but John's going to give you some really interesting insights there. And then finally, getting into HVR and Snowflake together, why we work so well and why we're seeing such great success, and then talk a little bit about a customer's case study. So let's jump into it. John, you want to talk to us a little bit about SAP and its importance?
Yeah, sure. So we pulled this from the SAP's Investor Relations website, and I think it does a good job of highlighting just how prevalent SAP is across the world, right? I think it's a pretty interesting stat that 77% of the world's transaction revenue touches an SAP system at that point in time. And when we think about the type of data that SAP systems are generally creating or working with, it's very dense, rich data that lends itself well to analysis, right? I think enterprise resource planning data, customer relationship data, product lifecycle management data. A lot of the core data sources that businesses use just to exist goes through an SAP system, and it's very important to be able to not just analyze that data in the context of the transactions that are being executed, but to bring it into a system for more large scale analytical use cases, put in the context of not just SAP data by itself, but also non-SAP data. So there's a lot of value in taking this data and working with it to gain better insights to business processes or your customers or anything else.
Yeah, John, those numbers are just enormous, right? 98% of the 100 most valued brands, are SAP customers. If I think about back in my time, I spent some time at Sun, and back in 2008, 2009, I actually helped a state government implement a new SAP system. So, everybody thinks of SAP and consumer products and logistics, but state governments and federal governments utilize this as well. And, these systems are extremely rigid because they have to be. They are the lifeblood of these businesses. And that leads to, the systems being extremely reliable because they are so, finitely defined, and the way you implement them is very stringent. But that leads to the problems of, the data is really locked there. You can't do a whole lot outside of, SAP with your SAP data. So it makes it, really difficult to do some of the new and interesting things people are doing around data. And data warehousing is involved in an immense amount, right? We're very used to the old school of I've got a data warehouse where we spent a year deciding the data model and then we migrated the data and we get, data feeds once a week, hopefully. That world doesn't exist anymore, right, John?
Yeah, that's right. It's kind of long gone to the days where you have a 18-month ERP implementation and analytics are kind of an afterthought. Customers are looking for a much faster innovation cycle, and it can be hard to accomplish that with some of the traditional systems, which is why being able to get that data into a platform like Snowflake using a tool like HVR can really add value to not just the data itself, but the decisions you make with that data.
Absolutely, and we all know with the modern data economy, if you are not looking at how to take your data and make better decisions and gain insights and drive more customer focus and attention, you're going to get left behind in the end, right?
Yep.
All right, so let's jump in. Like I said, a lot of you probably haven't heard of HVR before, but what it is HVR is all about high volume, real-time, log-based change data capture replication. Now, I said a whole bunch of buzzwords there, but really what it's about is taking that operational data from things like SAP or, other things like just traditional Oracle databases or SQL servers. Today, we're going to obviously talk more about SAP, but, wherever that data lives in its operational system, how do we get that somewhere else, whether that is for, backup and disaster recovery or high availability or the most interesting thing people are doing today is really analytics and how do you drive that analytics. And John touched on, the legacy of analytics is it was always an afterthought. We were, trying to bolt on an analytics system after we had already deployed these operational systems. And we all know that paradigm is fading very quickly. And you really got to think about how do we get that operational data from where it lives today into an analytical system as fast as possible. And that's where HVR really comes in. We have spent many years developing log-based CDC, which means we're reading directly from the transaction logs of your database systems. We're going directly to those logs in the file system. We're able to understand any transaction that has gone on. So we're reading that data and then being able to grab it and logically replicate it over to another location, Snowflake being one of the most highly growing targets today, and what we're here to talk about. But because we're doing log-based CDC, that gives you many different advantages. First off, as soon as those transactions are committed on that operational system, we're able to read them. And because we're reading it out of a file that is a part of your RDBMS to begin with, that file is likely in memory. So many times we're reading that directly out of the page cache. So real-time capture is, a huge benefit for any type of, real-time analytics. You got to be able to capture that stuff from the beginning. And because of our distributed architecture and our ability to run either with or without an agent, we have that ability to meet your needs. It's not a HVR tells you how to deploy and run your systems. It's HVR will be able to meet the needs that you have of the systems you already have in place today. So again, HVR is all about log-based change data capture for real-time reporting and analytics. So why HVR for SAP? So we talked quickly at the beginning about why SAP data is important, but the real part is SAP data is hard to get out of SAP because of the stringent requirements that SAP has. Getting that data out can not only be difficult, but it can affect your system. The official way SAP has for you to get data other than through the application interfaces is two things, one called ABAP and the other called BAPI. But what these actually are API interfaces, and they can as soon as you run anything against them, they cause load in your middleware and on your database in the end, which is something we want to avoid because these are critical systems that are, balanced very well with their traditional load, and adding new load is a lot of times unacceptable. Also, these interfaces don't necessarily give you all of the critical data. These are, things that are published, and you can only get to the things that they publish out. Not everything in the data set is published. So very critical that you can be able to get all of that information straight from the database that it lives in. Now, in the SAP world, there are really two schools of deployment. There is sort of the more traditional, which has a Oracle or SQL Server or other RDBMS backend. And then there's the newer world that is SAP HANA, which is their in-memory, SAP's in-memory database for new SAP and existing SAP migrations. Because of this, you really have to kind of look at it as two different environments of where your data lives. So because HVR is a heterogeneous log-based CDC, we can get that data whether it lives in an Oracle or SQL Server, or if it lives in SAP HANA. Now, on top of that, there's some decisions that SAP made in their implementations that make that data a little more complicated than just reading it out of the database itself. So for SAP HANA, it is actually difficult to get all of the data when you have a change. Say I have a row that updates. Maybe I am changing a customer's location or an order details. The transaction log that SAP HANA will create then will just include the things that have changed. HVR has built many capabilities, but one specific one for SAP HANA where we can actually figure out where the rest of that row is, so we can log a complete transaction or a complete row for those changes, so you're not worried about missing data. Another thing in the more traditional SAP with Oracle or SQL Server is there are some nested data types called called clustered and pooled tables. Both of those tables, if you look at them in their native format inside the database, it has data all mixed throughout. And if you're familiar with things like JSON, it's going to look a little bit like that, but it's going to be a lot harder to really understand what's going on. So HVR has the capabilities to take those nested data types and turn them into what we call transparent tables. So they look just like the data you would expect them, how you would expect it to look. And then finally, I'm going to talk a little bit about the integration. HVR is all about delivering that data in a logical way. We're not, copying and sending bits directly across. We have the ability to understand the transactions that went on the source system and then recreate those on the target system. So that being said, things like mismatched data types and encoding differences, HVR has all the great bits to help you take care of those things so you can get your data across. Not only do we help with the ongoing continuous replication, but also those initial data loads. HVR has built something called refresh, which allows you to get that initial data load very quickly over to the system, so then we can start capturing those updates, inserts, updates, and deletes as they happen. And then, lastly, it's critical that your data is the same on the sources and targets. So HVR compare can take and compare your data on both of those systems and give you a confidence in your data. And if something has happened that it has gotten out of sync and you have different data in the source and target, HVR can help you solve that too. We can either provide you with the small amount of SQL that would take care of it, or we can do a full refresh and load that data again so that you have the confidence that your data is in sync. And we utilize all of Snowflake's great security requirements around encryption and authentication and access, so that from the start, whether you're running Snowflake in AWS, Microsoft, or Google, that you're going to be secure. Your data will be encrypted throughout its travel, and you can be confident that it is the same on the source and target. Now I'm going to throw it over to John to talk to us a little bit about Snowflake.
All right, sounds good. A couple things I want to say about HVR first, and there's a couple of reasons I really like them. Number one is it's log-based, right? So a lot of people, SAP administrators running the system, they have a system that's been tuned for running transactions, right? So, you don't run transactions and analytics in the same system, regardless of what database the underlying application is running on, right? HVR, doesn't put any additional stress on the database because they are doing that log-based replication. So it's good from an SAP standpoint not to have that extra load in there, right? Second thing I really like about it is that it doesn't just do CDC from the SAP system. It does that, and it does a very good job at it. But it also applies the changes on the Snowflake side. And, that's not the easiest thing in the world to do. And HVR does a great job of it. Because, any inserts, updates, deletes that are happening in the SAP system are applied in the Snowflake system, right? Which is another great benefit that I really like. Now, if we start talking about, what is Snowflake, right? Snowflake is a cloud data platform, and we were built from the ground up to run in the cloud. So we're not an on-premise technology that was lifted and shifted to the cloud. We're not an old technology that was, built for other purposes and moved to the cloud. We are truly a cloud data platform built cloud native. We are a complete SQL database as part of that platform. So we support, standard, table and row column tables. You can write SQL to query those tables, join them in anything else. We also have support for semi-structured and unstructured data as well. So whether we're talking JSON, XML, Avro, Parquet, or more files, at this point we can intake image, audio, video files, you name it. We're a single source for all of your data. We're a zero management platform, so there's you don't have to worry about keeping the lights on when it comes to Snowflake. Snowflake manages that for you. Really, all you worry about doing is loading data into Snowflake. And using that data once it's in a platform for you. We're a place for all of your data, and really for all of your users, whether we're talking data scientists, analysts who are running different BI reports, and kind of anything in between. Because we can handle all of the different types of data out there, and we scale automatically to meet whatever concurrency requirements you have or data volumes you're talking about. And we have customers that have gigabytes of data. We have customers that have hundreds of petabytes of data and everything in between. So we handle that scaling and infrastructure management for you. So all your users have to do is get interesting insights from the data. You pay for what you use. So we charge for this data you actually have stored in Snowflake, and we pay for the actual compute you use by the second, right? So you don't have to worry about sizing a system for what it's going to look like 3 years down the road. You can basically purchase enough Snowflakes for your needs now, and Snowflake can grow with you as your use cases grow. And then finally, something that's a really interesting feature, especially when it comes to SAP data, is this concept of live data sharing. And just as an example of that, imagine you have your point of sale data you're collecting, right? And you want to share that point of sale data, whether it's sell-through and inventory type data, with your vendors, right? Using HVR, you can replicate that point of sale data out of your SAP system and into Snowflake, and then using the data sharing capabilities of Snowflake, you can do secure data sharing of that point of sale data with your vendors. So maybe you can have them help you manage, inventory at the store level, or understand how selling items so they can ship more to the store. This all happens within Snowflake Cloud Data Platform. And move to the next slide. So when we talk about Snowflake, we really try to think of how you would use Snowflake in terms of 6 different workloads, right? So, Snowflake it can serve as a great data warehouse for you. A lot of customers have been using Snowflake as a data warehouse, for years, right? But Snowflake can also handle, a number of other workloads. And we kind of think about these workloads in terms of how Snowflake works with them. So if you are looking for a data lake, Snowflake can serve as your data lake because we can handle all of these different data types, and we can scale from both a storage and compute perspective independently. We have a lot of customers who are using Snowflake to put all their data in, right? And if you talk to different SAP customers, as the big data has become a thing, right? From a percentage standpoint, maybe SAP data accounts for less than 10% of the actual data volume, but the value of that data is extremely high. There's all this other data that are being collected from devices or phones, IoT, kind of you name it, right? Clickstream type data. You can have the SAP data and all this other big data in Snowflake. So you have all your data in one place. So you can really start putting your SAP data in the context of all this other types of data you're collecting. So you can gain deeper insights to your customers. Maybe it's a customer 360 or your products or anything else. So from a data lake perspective, you can build your data lake on Snowflake. Part of building a data lake is data engineering and building data pipelines. So we have a lot of tools, in Snowflake that help you ingest data, process data, and then finally present that data to analysts, data scientists, kind of you name it. There's a lot of ways to work with data in Snowflake. This data exchange, I kind of touched on it, this data sharing concept. The data that you have in Snowflake, you can share with other Snowflake customers or non-Snowflake customers as well. So you can help vendors, suppliers, or whoever else get access to these insights. You can build data applications on Snowflake. That's a big thing recently. And then finally, Snowflake is a platform for data science. When you kind of put all these other tools together, given how we can scale to meet your needs, we have customers using it as a platform for data science. So if you click on the next slide here, and what makes that possible is our architecture here, right? And we'll get into the architecture a bit deeper on the next slide. So if we look at the Snowflake architecture, we currently run on the three major clouds, so Google, AWS, and Azure. And kind of the first layer of Snowflake is a layer that obfuscates what cloud you're running on. So from a customer standpoint, you don't have to know what cloud you're running on. It's just Snowflake regardless of the cloud. The next layer up is the storage layer. So depending on what cloud your Snowflake account is running on, data in Snowflake is persisted as files in blob storage. So it could be GCS, S3, or Azure blob storage. It's physically stored as files. Logically, though, you are viewing data as tables with rows and columns, and like really any other type of table you'd be used to using in a database. So this layer can scale from nothing to virtually the size of a cloud provider region from a storage perspective. And kind of like what I mentioned before, we have some customers with hundreds of petabytes of data in Snowflake. So this layer scales independently of the next layer up, which is that multi-cluster compute layer. And you can think of this multi-cluster compute layer as, you can have ephemeral, distinct clusters of compute for performing different tasks. And each one of these compute clusters is its own MPP system. So, we think about how HVR, right? HVR would use a warehouse to load data into Snowflake, right? So after you have the SAP data loaded into HVR, with one warehouse, you then maybe want to transform that data into something aggregated or combine it with other data. You can have a separate, distinct warehouse that processes that data, right? So now you've separated those workloads, so the loading that HVR is doing isn't interfering with the transformations you're applying to the data or the joining of that data with other data you have in Snowflake, right? And then, so we have a third warehouse, and that third warehouse is used by BI or analysts running dashboards, right? So each one of these warehouses isolates the compute and is independently scalable from all the other warehouses. So maybe with HVR, you need a small warehouse for loading data. For applying the transformations, you have a medium warehouse to transform the data. And then finally, maybe your data scientists are doing some crazy things with both SAP data and non-SAP data that are in Snowflake. So they need a 2XL warehouse to run, large complex joins and processing. That second layer here, the workhorse of Snowflake, is the layer where the compute takes place, and it scales independently of storage. And then finally, top layer up here is the scale-out services layer, right? And so, from a data platform perspective, you can think of us as an ACID database. We are transactionally consistent, and we're a very secure platform. And this is all made possible by this scale-out services layer, which again scales independently of compute and storage, right? So this architecture here is really part of what makes it a great platform for taking the data that HVR is sending over, and then transforming that SAP data into something more meaningful, and combining that SAP data with non-SAP data to make better decisions, or share with your vendors and partners. Let's move up to the next slide here. And really, this is just a high-level functional architecture of what I just described. On the left-hand side, you can see there's an SAP application, or it could be anything else as well. It could be databases, web applications, kind of you name it. Either way, we have HVRs using that warehouse to load data from SAP into Snowflake centralized storage. And then you have different warehouses that perform different tasks and can scale independently depending on what you want to do. So there's a warehouse for transforming the data. Finance analysts are maybe doing month-end close or whatever they need to do with the data. We can scale up, so you can have a larger warehouse to do more work, or we can scale out. And what that means is within a cluster, you can have, within a warehouse, you can have multiple clusters to handle more concurrency from your end users. And that's kind of what's being shown by that marketing analytics reporting BI warehouse, is that you can, as user concurrency increases, Snowflake can automatically turn more clusters on with the warehouse to handle that. So we can scale up and scale out from a compute perspective, and virtually infinite scale from a data perspective. And I think that's it for the functional architecture slide.
Yeah, thanks, John. One of the things that I really enjoy about Snowflake is that this connection of the compute and storage and not being tied down to, decisions you make today. John, I know you've been in analytics a long time. I've been in analytics a long time as well. And no one ever really at the beginning understands the size that the analytics is going to get to, especially the more successful it is. I'm sure, John, you've been in a bunch of meetings where, you're telling a customer, hey, pre-Snowflake, you need to size this data warehouse for, at least 5 or 6x what you expect today. And that's probably going to be on the light side when you really get there, if this is going to be successful, because time and time again, good analytics scale exponentially. So as you do better, it's just, you're just going to get more and more people coming to the well and coming and wanting more analytics, right, John?
Yeah, and honestly, I couldn't think of a worse thing you could do historically than undersize your data warehouse, because traditionally resizing, up if you've undersized your platform is really difficult and causes a lot of problems. Mm-hmm. So a lot of times, customers would, oversize their analytics environment. And you're right, maybe it's 5 or 6x, maybe it's 10x. Either way, they are spending more money than they need to, for what might happen in the future. And you're right, from a Snowflake perspective, you only pay for what you need, and we can grow over time, seamlessly, right? There's no big hit. There's no concept of undersizing or oversizing. It just is, so we can grow with the customer.
Exactly. Yeah, great points. So a little bit about, HVR and Snowflake together. HVR is all about that low impact data movement, taking high volumes of transactional data, grabbing it out of the log systems of your RDBMSs and other systems, and then logically replicating it across. HVR has things like built-in compression because we reverse engineered the transaction logs. We get a great understanding of that data and can compress it in immense ways, as well as for security. We can do end-to-end encryption. Our agent-based deployment, if you choose to go that way, allows you to do things like only have a single hole in your firewall to move data through, no matter how many sources and targets you have. That HVR, and HVR is taking care of that communication across that single open part in the firewall, and it's encrypted end to end, especially when we're going to places like Snowflake. And then unlocking that data, taking what used to be locked down in a data silo, that is SAP, being able to not only do analytics on just the SAP data, but also being able to combine it with non-SAP data and other interesting things. If you went and talked to SAP about, integrating non-SAP data, they would likely tell you there is no data that isn't SAP data. But we all know there's lots of other systems out there, right, John?
Yeah, that's a funny point. I think it's there's a lot more data than just SAP data, and it's a lot easier to take SAP data and put it in Snowflake with all your other non-SAP data than it is to take your non-SAP data into SAP for that type of analysis. Just simply even talking from a scale perspective.
Right.
Like this.
Yeah, and then from a multi-cloud perspective, HVR is more of a traditional, you download and install and run it somewhere. So wherever your data lives, whether that's on premises or in one of the large cloud providers, HVR can meet your needs there. And obviously Snowflake as well, being in all three clouds. And I believe you guys have some new things around, enabling a little bit of data movement between those clouds. Right, John?
Yeah. I mean, so regardless of what cloud you're in, HVR can get the data into Snowflake, which is great. You can run your Snowflake deployment in, like I said, GCP, AWS, or Azure. We have a lot of different regions available in any one of those clouds. And if for whatever reason, you need to replicate. Let's say you're running Snowflake in AWS, right? But you have a vendor who's running Snowflake in GCP, and you want to share data from your AWS account to your vendor in GCP. What you can do is, Snowflake has replication, so any data that's in Snowflake can be replicated to any cloud, any region that Snowflake is running in. So we have seamless data replication across clouds, in addition to being able to run in any cloud.
Yeah, and that data sharing piece, I think, is something just genius you guys came up with early on, and I think a lot of people didn't really understand what its effects are going to be. But as people are building more and more data products, or even just organizationally inside large organizations, it's hard to share data, and you guys have really done an amazing job at enabling that.
Yeah, and SAP data is extremely valuable data. That if you the point of sale is a great example. If you can get that point of sale data from SAP into Snowflake using HVR, there's a lot of value in sharing that data with vendors and suppliers who can help with inventory or sales or anything else. And that's seamless in Snowflake.
Absolutely.
The data sharing and secure.
Got it. Hey, Josh.
Secure end-to-end. Yes.
Josh and John, okay, you're going to go through because you've got a few minutes, so you want to. I think people would love to hear the Pitney Bowes case study as you finish up.
Absolutely. Thanks. Thanks for giving us a check-in on the time. So I know we're getting to the end, and we want to talk to you a little bit about one of our joint customers, Pitney Bowes. Now, if you're not familiar with Pitney Bowes, apparently they've been around a very long time, originally founded in the 1920s. And really built their business around, global commerce solutions, whether that's traditional commerce, in that one of their early things they did was actually build scales so that you could officially weigh mail and send it to the U.S. Post Office without having to go to a post office and do that. But today they're really about e-commerce, building solutions around the commerce of businesses. And they came to both HVR and Snowflake around the same time, looking to better get a handle on their analytics and data warehousing. They wanted to consolidate a bunch of different data sets. And here's a great case. They had, SAP as their main system of record, but then they also had an Oracle finance module that it was not in SAP. And so getting those two pieces of data were very tricky. Originally they came to HVR and said, hey, can you just help us get this data out and drop it into some sort of object store where we can really take it from there? And we dug in and said, hey, sure, we can definitely help you get these down to files, but what are you going to do with it once they're files? And they said, well, we really want to get into Snowflake. And we said, well, hey, why don't we just put it directly in Snowflake? Let's take out this middleman. You guys don't need to worry about the pipeline of getting it from wherever it is in the object store over to Snowflake and ingested. Let HVR take care of that for you, because that's really undifferentiated technical baggage that you guys don't need. So with HVR, they were able to take and use our log-based change data capture to capture their data in real time and transmit it across over to Snowflake, giving them a much better view of their business. They were then really able to dig in and better understand, and in the end, it's really about time savings and time to value. One of the quotes we got was they were able to take a 31-hour month-end process and bring it down to under 2 hours, because not only was HVR delivering this data in real time, Snowflake was able to process it in near real time as well. And when the data was already there, so as soon as end of month happened, they kicked off their jobs to get their reporting done. So we're taking, processing time down from days to just a couple of hours. And that's what we mean when we talk real time. And that is for, some of their batch processing, let alone their real time use cases. With that, I think we're at our time. So any next step, feel free to reach out, info@hvr-software.com. HVR-software.com is our webpage. Snowflake.com is where to go to see Snowflake, and we'd love to have a conversation and do more.